Hello, my name is Carol Lethaby, and together with my colleague Patricia Harries, we will be talking about our paper, Learning Styles and Teacher Training, Are We Perpetuating Neuromyths? This talk will have three parts, like our paper. We'll consider, first of all, neuromyths and what they are. Then we'll talk about our research, the actual study that we carried out amongst English language teachers in the US and Canada. And then we'll consider the implications of this for teacher education, which is really our big focus and interest. First of all, what is a neuromyth? Well, this is the definition that we were working with. Basically, it's something that people think is true about the brain and is often used to use it in education or some other context, but which neuroscientists, brain scientists consider not to be true about the brain. We, in our study, asked teachers, English language teachers, to actually try to find the neuromyths from a list of statements. Here are the statements. Perhaps you want to consider whether you agree or disagree with these statements. We mostly use only 10% of our brain. Individual learners show preferences for the mode in which they receive information. Vigorous exercise can improve mental function. Learning problems associated with developmental differences in brain function cannot be remediated by education. Differences in hemispheric dominance can help explain individual differences amongst learners. Short bouts of coordination exercises can improve integration of left and right hemispheric brain function. Individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. Teaching to learning styles is more important in language learning than in other types of learning, and extended rehearsal of some mental processes can change the shape and structure of some parts of the brain. So these were the statements that we asked teachers to evaluate and to say whether they agreed or disagreed with them. More of that later. All right, so why do neuromyths exist? Well, there are a few reasons. Probably sometimes they are actually based on reality, which we will look at in a few moments. But very often things that are myths get perpetuated and go unchallenged, for example, in the popular media, until they become common belief and people believe them to be true and don't even question them. Secondly, sometimes the evidence for that these things are not true is maybe hidden in some kind of technical journal or some kind of neuroscientific research study, and it may not be very clear cut and easy for someone without experience in these fields to understand them. And thirdly, sometimes they are untestable. They are kind of black box theories, and there can be no evidence for them. Okay, so this is the neuromyth that we were particularly interested in looking at. The idea that learning is enhanced if people are classified and taught according to their preferred learning style. And here we were particularly interested in the VAC neuromyth, the visual audio kinesthetic neuromyth. This is an example of a neuromyth which is based on a valid research finding, which is that visual, auditory, and kinesthetic information is processed in different parts of the brain. However, these structures are very highly interconnected, and so it is therefore not true to think that we only learn things auditorily, we only learn things visually, we only learn things kinesthetically. So what does this mean in the classroom? How does this belief in this neuromyth manifest itself? I believe this, we've been doing this for many years now in language teaching. First of all, we spend time identifying learning styles. We do both formal and informal assessments. We try to teach to preferred learning styles with the idea that this is going to improve learning. So we do activities for visual learners, for auditory learners, for kinesthetic learners in order to improve their learning. Sometimes we style stretch, as Airman 96 calls it. We actually try to get learners to step out of their comfort zone and use styles which they're not so comfortable with in order to improve their learning again. And fourthly, and this is what particularly interested us, we teach on both initial and in-service training courses that this is important, that your students' learning styles are important, and that teaching to them is going to somehow help their learning. So what are the problems with learning styles? Well, the first problem is the idea of definition and assessment. Caulfield et al. From 2004 look at 30 models of learning styles. So we can see from this straight away that there is a problem with what exactly is a learning style. As I mentioned, we were particularly interested in the visual, auditory and kinesthetic learning styles, but Caulfield identifies about 80 different types of learning style altogether. So there seems to be a definition problem here, which then of course leads to a problem with trying to assess learners and what learning style they actually are. Second problem, there is no evidence that teaching to preferred learning styles actually enhances learning. Here, this is an example of a study that shows no evidence for this. This is Kretzig and Arbuthnot from 2006. They used two ways to identify learners, the self-report, where the learner had to say what learning style she or he thought they were, and a questionnaire, which was specifically designed to try and identify the learner's visual, auditory or kinesthetic learning style. Kretzig and Arbuthnot found less than 50% agreement between the learner and the questionnaire, which is problematic right from the get-go. And then further, they found no correlation between the learning style and objective test performance. For example, on the self-report, 40% of the learners self-identified as visual learners. However, on the questionnaire, 60% were identified as visual learners. This should mean that at least 40% of the people should perform best on the visual test. Only 23% performed best on the visual test. So a lot of contradictory information there, and really nothing to show that teaching to someone's learning style enhances learning. And there are several studies like this, and you'll see in the paper we have written several references to papers such as these. Third problem with learning styles, that some research suggests that teaching to all styles, as we do sometimes in language teaching, may actually be holding the learner back rather than helping the learner, and may actually be causing cognitive overload. For example, if you are playing a text for your auditory learners and asking the learners to read the text at the same time, this could actually may not actually be helping the learner. So what about in language learning and teaching? This was our big interest. How widespread is the use of learning styles in our teaching, and the belief that this helps learning? This was really the focus of our study, and this is what Patricia is going to tell you about next.
Hi, so we based our survey on one done by Howard Jones and his colleagues, published in 2014, in which they contacted 938 participants and sent them 38 statements about the brain. We took 8 of these statements, added one of our own, so our statements focused mainly on learning styles, and sent these to 128 ESL teachers based in Canada and the US. We asked the teachers to look at the statements and say whether they agreed with them, disagreed, or whether they didn't know. And we asked them not to go onto the internet or to Google for any of the answers. So here are the 9 statements. You've already seen these with Carol. Which are the ones that Howard Jones identifies as neuromyths? There are 6. Let's see if you got them right. So number 1, we mostly only use 10% of our brains. Number 4, learning problems associated with developmental differences in brain function cannot be remediated by education. Number 5, differences in hemispheric dominance, left brain, right brain, can help explain individual differences amongst learners. Number 6, short bouts of coordination exercises can improve integration of left and right hemispheric brain function. Number 7, individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style, for example, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Number 8, teaching to learning styles is more important in language learning than in other types of learning. Can you predict the percentage of our survey participants who agreed with these statements? That is, believed that they were true. Let's have a look. So statement number 1, we mostly only use 10% of our brains. That's just over 30% of our teachers agreed with that statement. Statement number 4, learning problems associated with developmental differences in brain function cannot be remediated by education. 6.25% of our teachers agreed with that statement. Number 5, differences in hemispheric dominance, left brain, right brain, can help explain individual differences amongst learners. That's coming up to 2/3 of our teachers, over 65%, agreed with that. Number 6 was short bouts of coordination exercises can improve integration of left and right hemispheric brain function. Almost 62% of our teachers agreed with that statement. Statement number 7, individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style, for example, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Just over 88% of our teachers agreed with that statement. And finally, statement number 8, teaching to learning styles is more important in language learning than in other types of learning. So coming up to 22% of our teachers agreed with that statement. So how did our teachers compare with the teachers who took part in the statement conducted by Howard Jones and his colleagues? Now, those teachers, the 938 teachers that they surveyed, were primary and secondary school teachers rather than language teaching specialists. And they came from 5 different countries: the UK, the Netherlands, Turkey, Greece, and China. So here we can see a comparison of results from our survey and from the other survey done by Howard Jones and his colleagues with the 5 other countries there. We can see that the overall trends are similar, and a high number of teachers in all the countries agreeing with statement number 7. So what might have led our teachers to agree with these statements? First, we asked them what kinds of TESOL training courses they had completed. So here's a breakdown of the courses they had done. Some of our teachers had taken more than one course. In the written comments section of our survey, we asked the teachers to say whether they had received input on brain-based ideas related to the statements on their TESOL training course or courses, which course they'd received this input on and what kind of input it had been, and whether it had influenced their subsequent teaching. And here are the results of those questions. So we can see 59% of the teachers overall said they received input on brain-based ideas on their teacher training course or courses. And of that 59%, 91% said the input had influenced their teaching. And here we can see a breakdown also by training course taken. Of particular interest is the fact that only 64% of the teachers who took the CELTA course said they received input on brain-based ideas, whereas in fact learning styles is on the syllabus, and that should mean that 100% of CELTA trained teachers would have received input on learning styles. So, as you might expect, the brain-based idea that was most frequently mentioned was in fact the one to do with perceptual learning styles. And Howard Jones says this is perhaps the most important and influential myth of them all. So some of the written comments that we got are here. This person who took a certificate in TESOL says, I remember learning about different learning styles on my course. I do test my students now to see if they are auditory, visual, or kinesthetic. Another respondent says, after learning about different learning styles, I try to cater to all the different learning styles in my teaching in order to reach as many students as possible. Another respondent, the input on brain-based ideas on my TESOL course has made me recognize that differences are not solely preferences, but can be hardwired. Another comment, I took an entire class based on the brain and language learning. I asked students to do cross-lateral exercises as a warm-up, both to get blood flowing, but also to increase their hemispheric cross-lateralization. Of course, teachers don't just get input from their teacher training courses. This respondent said, I did some reading on learning styles, learned about the various different ones and what types of activities supported them. I also read that there is a lot of contention about whether learning styles really exist and really have any bearing on learning. In fact, neuroscientific findings that relate to education are often reported in the media. And one of the teachers that responded to the survey noted this. Decker and colleagues, who were part of Howard Jones's published survey in 2014, noted that their teachers, their 938 teachers, had all self-identified as being interested in neuroscience and education. And they felt that this interest can in fact make you susceptible to myths when information is oversimplified or overinterpreted in the media with an aim of reaching a mass audience. In fact, Decker and colleagues suggest that greater general knowledge about the brain is associated with a stronger belief in educational neuromyths. We also got comments from teachers who wanted more discussion of the topic of TESOL, of this topic on TESOL training courses and in subsequent professional development in the workplace. So to sum up, let's have a look at this question one more time. Where do teachers get their neuromyths from? So according to our survey, 59% of respondents said they had received brain-based ideas in their training, while 88% of the survey participants believe that accommodating perceptual learning styles enhances learning. So the blame doesn't lie entirely at the door of the TESOL training course. The conclusions that we drew from our survey then were these. Firstly, TESOL training courses may encourage beliefs in neuromyths. Teachers say their teaching is influenced by beliefs in neuromyths. Teachers also hear and read about neuromyths and brain-based ideas outside of their teaching and training. And finally, teachers would like more discussion of brain-based ideas on their TESOL training courses and in post-training professional development.
So having looked at the study, let's consider now our recommendations based on the results of the study. Well, first of all, our first recommendation is that we should stop wasting time and resources with learning styles assessments. Clark says, if you total the expenditure on books, workshops, tests, teachers' guides, and other adjunct resources, I suspect the investment goes into the millions. And when there is no evidence that it actually helps learning, this seems as if it's something we don't need to be doing in language teaching. Rena and Willingham suggest that the emphasis on learning styles often comes at the cost of attention to other important dimensions. Previous knowledge being one of them. Clark mentions this as the single most widely demonstrated difference in learning outcomes. Therefore, second recommendation, why don't we focus on evidence-based ways that we know are more helpful to learners? So, for example, learning how to use visuals, text, audio together more effectively. We've cited a couple of studies here, Butcher 2006, Wouters et al. 2008 on this topic. Again, as Clark says, the single most widely demonstrated difference in learning outcomes is prior knowledge. So why aren't we focusing much more on how to help teachers to use prior knowledge to help their learners to learn more effectively? As Rena and Willingham say again, we should present information in the most appropriate manner for our content and for the level of prior knowledge, ability, and interests of that particular set of students. Thirdly, we should consider whether teaching to all styles, that is visual, auditory and kinesthetic, may actually be overload for the learner. And in terms of teacher training, we have chosen a set of recommendations based on the work of Pickering and Howard-Jones and Decker et al. Firstly, in teacher education, we feel we should stop teaching and perpetuating neuromyths, and that we should actually talk about this openly with trainees. This may include, for example, including neuroscience and psychology in initial teacher training. We can help teachers as well during this time to read and evaluate and actually take advantage of scientific research as it is coming up and seeing how it could be useful to us in English language teaching. Decker et al. Suggests the use of a hybrid professional, someone who knows something both about the field of neuroscience and teaching, which we think would be a particularly helpful development. Overall, it seems that we need to look at the importance of a dialogue between teachers and neuroscience experts in order to establish effective collaborations between the two fields. We feel that thus far, really in English language teaching, we really haven't had that much information or help from the field of neuroscience, and we would really like to see that happening. The paper can be found here in the English Language Teaching Journal. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this short summary of our paper.